Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight. We'll get started in just a moment. But just as a reminder for these presentations, this is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel a little later on. So you're welcome to keep your screens off if you would like and keep yourselves muted. And there will be a chance at the end of the presentation to ask questions if you have any. But I'm very happy you're here and happy to get started and chat about tonight's artwork. So I will go ahead and share my screen. And we can get going. All right. So hello again, everyone. I'm Julia Jessen. I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. I want to thank you all so much for joining me tonight for this one night stand presentation. This is a series of presentations that we do at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, where we focus on one work of art and one artist for one night. Tonight, I'll be discussing Margaret Lanzetta's Untitled from 1994, which is made with graphite on mylar and measures 63 3/4 inches by 42 1/2 inches. And it was a gift of Sally and Win Kramarski. This work is currently on view in Beyond the Object, Women Working in Abstraction, which runs until October 26th of 2025. However, to best preserve this piece in perpetuity, it will actually be swapped out with another piece about halfway through the run of the exhibition. So see it while you can. And this presentation actually continues a little run of our one night stand presentations, where both Sean and I have been focusing on work from this exhibition. So I did one in December that focused on another work from this exhibition, and Sean also did one in January. So we've really been dialing in on this exhibition for these last few presentations. This piece became part of our collection through a donation from Werner, also known as Win and Sally Kramarski. They began collecting in 1958 with the purchase of a drawing by Jasper Johns, and their collection was loosely focused on minimalism, post-minimalism, and conceptual art. Every so often, they would donate a portion of their collection to a museum. And in 2009, they donated 20 drawings to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, allowing us to be able to say that we have a number of wonderful artists in our collection, including Sol LeWitt, Lois Dodd, and our focus tonight, Margaret Lanzetta. There is one other piece that was donated by the Kramarskis that's also included in the exhibition where Lanzetta's piece can be found. It is Pearl Fine's Pale Gold Oval painting from 1975, which I actually focused on for the one night stand presentation back in December. So if you visit, keep an eye out for that piece as well. And actually, they should be pretty easy to find because both of these are actually right next to each other on the wall. I think they form a really interesting pairing, a really kind of compelling couple of pieces together on the wall. So do come in and check it out in person if you can. To get into Margaret Lanzetta, she was born in 1957. She attended the Skowhegan School in Maine and the Tyler School of Art in Rome. And she also received a Master of Fine Arts degree from the School of Visual Arts in New York. Much of her work revolves around repetitive patterns used on the surface of industrial materials or mixed with textiles and printed imagery on a panel or a canvas surface. This piece that we're focusing on certainly does demonstrate that interest in repetitive patterns by using lines and boxes. The top and bottom compound those simple geometries by layering a series of rows atop each other. And here's a couple of views of the piece in the exhibition. So we have areas where the value and opacity of the lines changes and creates a little more interest in the piece. Lanzetta has said about her work, quote, "My work explores the confluence of organic, cultural, and industrial motifs," end quote. And a little detail up close view of some of these lines here. So she often uses stamping, rubbing, printing, She very rarely works with brushes in her work. She comes out of a sculpture tradition and just never really felt very comfortable with that form of mark making. So instead, she relies on these others: stamping, rubbing, printing. And at this time, so in the early 90s, she was working with these materials on long industrial mylar panels. These referenced not only the scale of her sculptures that she was making prior to this. I said she came out of that sculptural tradition, but also the scale of the human body as well. This is a pretty large piece, and it feels on par with the scale of a human body. In this piece, she's thinking about the intersection of nature and industry. When people see this piece, sometimes they think it is a screen, some sort of an industrial material that is just framed and on the wall. And it's not until they get closer and approach it from different angles and see how the light hits it that they see these marks on the surface of the mylar. That mylar itself is also an interesting material. It's a manufactured plastic. Um, so it is entirely man made, but the translucency of the mylar gave it some interest for the artist. And for her, it helped it to feel almost like the same material as something like vellum, like a calfskin vellum. So something that is organic, and being able to sort of create a reference to that type of material through something that is very industrial and man made. So she's juxtaposing those things, thinking about them in consideration of each other. She also is often thinking about textile traditions in her work, about this sort of accumulative and repetitive process that's involved in creating textiles, things like weaving, other different forms of textiles like that. And we see that here too with this sort of layering of all these lines. Layering them on top of each other, creating those different tonal values and opacities in the work. And I also just wanted to show this blurry photograph just to hopefully allow you to see a little bit. This is the top section of the piece, the white section where we don't have the lines. And because of the materials that she's using, that graphite on the mylar, there are a lot of smudges up in this area. But I think they're really interesting because, again, like I said, people can come into the gallery and at first glance, they might look at this and think that it is a screen or something that is very industrial. But then we have these smudges and this kind of evidence of the hand of the artist that's still present in the artwork itself. So again, kind of juxtaposing these different things, the natural and the man-made, organic versus inorganic, all of these different things together. I want to get a little bit into some of her influences and some of her other work, and then kind of swing back around to this piece. So Lanzetta has actually traveled very extensively in India, Japan, Southeast Asia, and North Africa. And here I'm showing you a few of her travel shots from a Moroccan artist residency that she did from 2011 to 2012. And it's her travels to all of these different places that really inform a lot of her imagery that she's using in her work. So things like Buddhist iconography and meditation practices, Islamic geometry, and also the things that she experiences in these cultures, notions of hybridity, migration patterns, and also the textiles that she would come across in all of these different areas. These different cultural references make their way back into her work as well. She's often investigating how these world decorative traditions relate to contemporary cultural, political, and environmental narratives. And oftentimes, this also involves textiles as well. So, in some of her more recent work, she'll combine globally sourced patterned textiles with painting and silk screening to create tactile works where she plays with ideas of geopolitics and these very, very old motifs, centuries old motifs. Um, She'll also mimic the accumulative process of weaving, kind of what I mentioned before, by layering up these images. So she'll repeatedly silkscreen stripes, florals and zigzags on the surface of collage textiles, or in the case of this piece, on paper that's then mounted onto canvas. So the resulting work also references modern painting traditions. She's often bringing in things like the grid. She's working very much in kind of a pattern and decorative sort of movement. And what she's really hoping for and striving for in her work is something that's like a cultural dialogue, to provide kind of a respite in what she sees as something that can feel like an overwhelming global cacophony of cultures and religions. And she often points to other artists who have influenced her work as well. So people like Andy Warhol and Yayoi Kusama. With them, she references the seriality of the recurring motifs that they use, being kind of in conjunction with some of the recurring motifs that she uses in her work. And also the vibrancy of their colors, too, is something that she incorporates as well, while also often working in monotonous colors, too. Going back in time a bit to around the same time as when our work that we're focusing on tonight was created in the early 90s, early to mid 90s. She had worked primarily as a sculptor, like I mentioned, in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And she created pieces like that, which you see on your screen here. For this group, she wove rubber strips into elongated containers that feel at the same time very organic, but also quite machine like too. They feel as if she wanted to gather things together, to repair them, to wrap them up, and make this kind of vessel like form that could hold different elements. And the work that she was doing at this time, she definitely credits some inspiration coming from Eva Hesse, who was a really influential sculptor, huge in the post minimal art movement. She worked in latex, fiberglass, and plastics. Um, so, using these kind of industrial materials and creating sculptures from them as well. And so, thinking about some of these other artists that she's worked with or worked somewhat inspired by. So Lanzetta starts in sculpture, but she actually moves away from the three-dimensional a bit into two-dimensional around 1992. But when she does that, she didn't want to sacrifice her interest in physically repetitive, meditative processes like stacking, layering, and weaving. And she still had this desire to physically record the imprint of the material world. And so her sculpture processes transformed into those processes that I mentioned before, that of stamping, rubbing, and printing. So here you're seeing a grouping of works from around this period. Of course, one of her sculptural works is there in the center, short sack slash collar, and it's surrounded on either side by two-dimensional works that she created in 1993 and 1994. And for all of these, she is creating them on mylar. So these again are those long mylar panels. But here she's using acrylic and polyurethane on the surface of the mylar. So her artistic vocabulary is really broadening at this time. She's using a more diverse range of materials and of mark making techniques. Um, but she's still maintaining some of these interests that she had even with her sculptures. And even that use of mylar, kind of similar to her use of rubber, again, thinking about these intersections of nature and industry. In the late 90s, this interest continues. These are a couple of pulp paintings that she created during a workspace residency grant through Dieudonné. And here she's combining industrial organic systems, really layering things up, using this patterning, and doing this even in works on paper as well. This was kind of an exploration into works on paper at this time. Moving into the 2000s, she's combining references derived from machine parts and the surface textures of steel plates, along with floral patterns and architectural ornamentation. She often thinks about them as if modern technology has invaded kind of a paradise landscape. And she underscores this through the forms that she incorporates, as well as her use of a really intense saturated color. In this piece, sometimes they can almost feel a little ominous, as if there is some sort of kind of poisonous element in this highly saturated, very colorful world. But at the same time, she also works in black and white. This piece, It's All Spiritual from 2010, where she's using this overlay of kind of a rich black, but then also these very flower like machine parts, creating something that is very decorative and feels at the same time very far removed from the previous piece where she's working in these bright colors and this sort of paradise like landscape. She also created multiple different series and has worked in series throughout her career. These are part of a series that she did in 2009, or around this time, started in 2009 and then worked on them through 2011 to 2015. And these are the company paintings. So these were conceived and completed after a 6-month Fulbright Research Fellowship to India and Syria in 2008. It resulted in 12 paintings in a square format. And in these works, she used alternating bands of color and one plant motif. She limited herself to using 4 silk screens printed in different color combinations. And each painting is titled the name and the telephone area code of a remote town in India. The title for the series, Company Paintings, comes, according to the artist, from the term for works commissioned by the East India Company to document India in the middle of the 18th century. So, as a British corporation that was originally chartered during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, the East India Company monopolized trade between England and India for more than 100 years. And so these paintings, the company paintings, were meant to present this kind of rosier side of colonialist history. So in Lanzetta's work, thinking about this, she's underscoring that ongoing clash between modern technology and ancient traditions, and thinking about how this has played out historically and continues to play out today, without offering a clear resolution to this persistent problem. So playing with these different ideas without providing an answer. Another series from a little bit later, the 2010 to 2018 American Time series. Um, in these works, she's incorporating Asian cultural and architectural motifs with the idea of an open expansiveness of the American West. She uses neon colors here that are drawn from OSHA industrial safety colors, and also the intense, really symbolic hues for Asian religious traditions. The works are titled after remote Western towns, and those very vibrant colors seem almost bleached as if by a strong desert sun. And through these, she makes an attempt to link and to question these disparate worlds, putting them together in her own unique way through her artwork. Place is something that resonates really strongly throughout Lanzetta's work. And in this series, Some Worlds from 2018 to 2019, these documented this kind of physical response that she had to place. All of the patterns here are sourced from areas of the world where she lived in the 30 years prior to this series. And in them, she thought about fusing the decorative with fine arts. She thought about incorporating organic motifs with Islamic geometry, combining a European sensibility with an Asian or Middle Eastern exuberance and opulence. And to create them, she used unregistered silk screens and contrasted them with digital pixelation. And this kind of combination was really meant to reference hand-tied carpets and something that is very traditional. So that sort of blurring that she's able to create through the unregistered silk screens, and the pixelation that's communicated there is meant to almost kind of remind us of something like a hand-tied carpet, something that is a very old tradition. The ink that she's using there is infused with mica to create this sort of metallic surface. And she's also paying homage to modern painting traditions, as we've seen through other works as well, using that sort of grid like structure. They're very monochromatic, and they have kind of that op art sensibility as well. Now, she didn't turn entirely away from sculpture. From 2016 to 2020, she worked on this series called Royal Flush. This was something that she was doing. She had been doing some historical research on crowns from several different cultures. And that was kind of combining in her mind with her interest in the decorative, in culturally inspired patterns, things that had already been informing her painting up to this point. And so, with this series, she explores the opulence and magnificence of crowns as a decorative object, but something that's often adorned with perhaps nefarious political symbols or religious patterning, really kind of questioning some of these different things. So they are drawn from real life crowns and also crowns that were created for pop culture as well. So on the right, you're seeing Joffrey's crown from Game of Thrones, and on the left, St. Edward's crown. Um, so they have kind of a fairy tale esque quality to them, but at the same time, they also seem to indicate power and kind of an omnipotent or autocratic power. She thinks about these as being created by anonymous artisans with the initial intent to canonize a dynasty, but also serving as a testament to conquest, to cultural migration, and assimilation as well. Often, the flora and fauna that are included on the crowns are either drawn from local motifs from peacefully aligned countries or they're exotic designs from conquered nations. Excuse me. She also thinks about the gems that were included in these crowns and how oftentimes they would come from um, an exploited, conquered country's mineral wealth. So there's a lot of really interesting, very symbolically complex elements that are coming together in these crowns. This is something that she started as part of a residency that she did at Greenwich House Pottery. And it was a residency for non ceramic artists. And she chose to work with this black porcelain clay body for its own associations with kind of regal symbolism with very fine, precious materials. And they're rendered larger than life. Going back to the slide that I showed you before, you can tell that these are much larger than they would originally appear. And that was intentional as well to sort of move them beyond a literal interpretation and call attention to the systems of power that she's investigating and kind of questioning throughout this series. So something very different from a lot of what we've seen, but still incorporating some of the same ideas. Coming back to where we started, throughout her career, Lanzetta continually questions industry and nature, notions of power, systems of oppression, through the use of those juxtaposed patterns and her often very methodical and meditative process of working. We've seen her do this in a variety of ways through the work that I've shown you tonight. And just to note that you can see much more of her work on her website, which is margaretlanzetta.com. Um, and she has a pretty robust website with some great descriptions of some of these different works. So it's a great artist website to check out. But though we've seen this variety through the works that we've looked at tonight, we also see her engaging with these themes even in this sort of early to mid 90s period when she created this work. So I hope that this has given you something more to think about when you come out to see Margaret Lanzetta's work in the exhibition at the CRMA. And I appreciate all of you listening very much. I wanted to also let you know quickly before I see if anyone has questions that next month's One Night Stand will be by Sean, and he will be looking at Anne Wilson's Hair Streak 2, which is also in the exhibition Beyond the Object. So still continuing that streak of talking about works from that exhibition. And I'm really looking forward to that one and learning a little more. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that as well. Thank you all again so much for joining me tonight for this One Night Stand presentation. And like I said, I hope you'll be able to come back next month as well. Have a wonderful rest of your evening and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.